Welcome to the Crafty Mini. Now in this one I've been asked a few times in comments and things, so how it is I go about doing my highlighting sections, and I came up with an idea. I'm hoping it'll come across and it'll help people, but in my head it makes sense, so I've gone ahead and we're just going to be painting this miniature with black and white, nothing else. So the miniature has been base coated in black, and like you see there on the wet palette I've added a little bit of white paint, and this will be the first highlight colour. And then what I'm going to do is throughout the footage you're going to see the progressive highlighted sections. So in a normal video where for example if I was painting like the coat red on this, you'd have a base coat in the standard red I'd use, and then I'd add something like scarlet in there just to brighten it up, and then I'd keep adding more of that scarlet to get progressively higher highlights, and they go on the raised areas. And then I always mention that you never want to paint over the original area fully, and you want to leave a little bit of that showing. So the idea of that is I'm going to show now with the black and white. So because there's such there's a difference in contrast, you should see where the paint marks are actually going, and you can see how the highlights with normal colours, when they blend up, and you actually get this really nice transition that comes through. So at the end of this will look a bit more sketchy than normal, so bear that in mind. However, it should show you, give you a good understanding of how to place your highlights and like the sort of brush strokes and things that I use depending on the item on the miniature that I'm painting. So I've chose this mini just because it's got multiple things. So we've got some nice sort of scales, we've got a lot of fabric, different types of cloth. Now the only things I won't paint on here are the buckle, the metal parts of the pistol and the sword, because I use traditional metallics paints for that. But in terms of everything else, you should be able to see as the video progresses the highlighted layers. So for this first step I've added a bit of white to the black, and I've got this nice dark grey, and I'm just picking out big bold areas of where I want that first little bit of highlight to be, and then we'll progressively get lighter. And as I say, with the white being such a high contrast to the black, you'll see the highlights go on a lot more than you would normally if they were all like shades of red or green or whatever. Right, so we've got that initial grey on there now. I haven't gone into the deepest recesses, and I've just picked out the majority of the detail, so it'll look pretty much that grey all over now. So next step is to add a bit more of the white in. Now obviously if this was whatever colour it is you're using on the miniature, whatever your highlighting colour is, you add a bit more in, and then you start picking out details. So you can see here on the face I'm concentrating around the beak and the lower lips and things, but you'll see I'm not going right the way up to my previous layer. I leave a little bit of that there so you get this nice transition from the darkest recesses to the highest points. And as we go on through the miniature I'll cut through and show you different angles so you can see we're doing the same process on different parts of the miniature. And you can see here on the coat in particular, I'm picking out some rather nice folds on the actual sculpt. So you can see I'm quite deliberate, large brush strokes, I'm picking those out, and then when it goes into the flatter areas, I'll blend that in a bit more. And I'm adding my own texture there. You can see there's a few extra paint strokes there I've added, not part of the miniature, but it just blends those big chunky folds in together into the actual rest of the fabric. And again, remember throughout the whole of this, if whatever colour you'd be using, that's where you'd be adding your transition colour to brighten it. I'm just using black and white to really accentuate the contrast so you can see it. And I'll be going around so areas like the shoulder, again picking out the big folds initially, and then seeing where they come together, and then deciding where I'm going to blend them in until we get to the extreme highlights. And this is a good example of what I meant with the sleeve there. So got these long large folds on his back, and because of the shape of the shell that's under the skin, it gives a really nice shape to the actual miniature. And you can see here, so I'm not being particularly neat, I'm just getting this on. That whole bump of his shell there would be a very bright area for the coat, no matter what colour it would be. So I'm just getting this highlight layer all over, and we'll go in with an even lighter version of it later to actually pick out all those little creases and folds. So it depends where you want your light source coming from. So I've done it as if it's from above. Now, even though like these folds here, which are slightly under the arm, I'd still pick those out with a normal colour anyway, just to give a bit of variation to that large, because he's got such a large area of cloth on his back. I'd want to pick those out, and there's a few sort of lateral bumps there that I'm picking out now. They'll get a little bit of brighter highlight later on in the future. So as you can see, I'm just popping this highlight colour all over. It's not that I'm trying to show like you do with the zenithal highlight that you see on some paint jobs. It's more to show where I'd pick out those highlights on a miniature with the respective colour, just to make it pop a bit more and give it a bit more visual sort of fidelity and a bit more fun when you're looking at it. Because, you know, for example, if this coat, initially my idea was to do this like a red coat. If this coat was the same red all over, all those lovely details that are on the sculpt would just get lost, and it just look like one flat colour. And by picking out certain areas with your highlight, by lightening that initial red, you get some nice visual interest on the miniature itself. So this part you should be able to see now how I'm being a bit more deliberate. So again, the brightness of the contrast in the greys is a lot more than it would normally be, but you can see there I've left all the inner folds of the actual hat, left then the initial black and the grey as it would be with the base colour, just so it's making the top of the hat pop a bit more. Same as on the wood, on the pistol and the fingertips and things. You'll see I'm just picking out the raised areas, because they're actually, the way it's wrapped around the pistol, they're facing upwards towards the light source, which would be, in this case, would be the sun. So those are the areas I'm concentrating on. And the underside of the hand, I don't really do much with it. I'll pick a little bit out like there and the wrap around the hand, but when we come to the extreme highlights, I'm not really going to touch that at all. Now, for anything that's rounded, like his cuffs here, so I'll map out the actual edge, and then you see there I've gone left to right with my brush strokes, just covering the top. Now I've gone a bit more haphazard with the very top of it, because I know I'm going to pick out a really particular highlight. But you'll notice there the underside of that actual cuff I've not touched at all. It's got its initial grey highlight, and that's it, because that's a part of the model that obviously the light source isn't touching, so I'm not going to bother highlighting it at all. And then with the pistol again, with the wood, I'm just picking out the raised areas, and we'll go in again and highlight this another time. Now this is just to show a good example of when I say don't go right up to the edge. So the belt has got its initial grey highlight. I've got this first highlighted mix. You can see here I'm going on with the colour, but you can see the outline of the actual belt itself. There's a little bit of a cut in the belt there that I've gone round and deliberately bordered, and I'm not going right the way up to the bottom. I'm going pretty close, but you can still see that initial grey underneath. Now here, where it curves over the top of the back, more of the belt's actually been painted in, and the same on the shoulder here, because this is facing directly up. And these are the sort of things you want to think about when you're highlighting your miniatures, is where is that light source that you want to accentuate, where is it hitting the miniature. So anyone who's watched the channel in the past knows that, so when it comes to highlighting, I'll do 1, 2, sometimes 3 highlights depending on the colour, and if I want a certain part of the miniature to pop out a bit more. So you can see it, you see the variation on the wet palette. We've gone from the black to the first grey to the second grey. Now this is the very third highlight, and as you see the clips from here on, you'll see me, I'm really deliberately picking out certain areas on the miniature. And you can see here zoomed in, so I've got that brighter grey now, and you can see where I'm just touching the tips of that previous layer that I've done. So I'm nowhere near the very first highlight, and I'm just going around picking out the raised areas, taking my time. And it's one of those, like with a lot of things when it comes to painting, it is just time. Take your time with it, don't rush it. And worst case, if you mess it up, you just go back over with the previous colour. So you can see here now, this is where I'll start picking out. There's very small details on his chest, these little lines, and I'm using just the tip of my brush with this highlight colour just to pick those out. So I'm going to zoom right in here on the face so you can see how very little I'm actually touching the miniature, and I'm just catching the raised edges on those little details, leaving a lot of that previous layer there. If I feel like it needs a bit more detail, I'll physically put in like there a few more lines, and here the raised area and picking it out, and same on the other side. It's a really simple way of just accentuating the detail on your mini. So this part here on the hat, now it's had obviously the initial colours, we're still on the same highlight layer. You can see here I'm actually picking out areas and then adding my own in, just to give a bit more colour variation and a bit more texture. And again, because obviously it's another version of fabric, this is like a leather, so it'll be a bit more scratchy and the folds will be a bit more pronounced. And you can see I'm variating, going up and down at different levels, just to give a bit more variation, because the face and the sort of upper chest of the character is where you want the most detail to pop. So same again here on the coat as before. Now I'm going in between the sort of little buttons a little bit more, but you can see I'm still just picking out the edges of the first areas that I did in that initial highlight. Okay, so on the shoulder here, so again with we're on the same highlight layer as before, but I'm going around and I'm picking it, so that major curve there of the seam, that's going to be the highest point that I want to concentrate on. Same as this big fold here that's on the actual miniature, and you'll see now how I blend them together. I'm just going back and forth, still leaving a little bit of the previous layer, and just feathering in and adding that paint on, and it just adds the highlight that I need. Same as we're coming down, you'll see it comes to a point, and then I'll go back over the larger ridges that are already on the miniature and just blending all these highlights in together and trying to keep it as crisp as possible. And again, you'll still see on the miniature I'm still leaving a little bit of that previous grey. So this is the main thing when you're coming to do any colour, leave a little bit of your previous colour there, because you'll be surprised how it transitions in and it makes it pop. And as I mentioned before, so these folds, again, they're getting another little highlight. This is technically an area it's in a bit more shadow, but it just adds a bit more variation to the miniature. And then on the back again, well, the same sort of thing, whereas I'm not going to go all over like I did last time. The very top of the miniature, this part here that's highest to the light and in the most sunlight, that's going to get more of the highlight. But as you see progressively as we go later on, there's less and less of it. Now this next part, because obviously this part of the coat, because this part of the coat obviously juts out from underneath it, the shadow that would be sort of coming from his arm, you can see here I'm again going in, picking out the major folds and following the shape and the form of the fabric. Follow it with your brush, don't go and paint it in a different direction, because it'll all add to it in the end. You'll see the transitions become a lot smoother if you're actually following the folds of the fabric. You can see I'm going from left to right downwards in a diagonal exactly as the fold is. And then same on the back, there's a big fold here, so I'm going to pick that out even though it's not in direct sunlight, just because it adds a bit more variation to a large sort of area on the back, which I've mentioned is quite a flat colour. And same again, so this time the folds are going from right to left, and then in that join in there I'm doing like almost like a half circle motion just to join them together, and picking them out, bringing it down to the bottom where it juts out on his tail, and then I'll blend it in. And this is the exact same process that you want to use each time you're doing a highlight on any colour. So if you remember what I mentioned about the cuffs earlier, so same sort of thing. So I'm picking out the main sort of curve, and you can see here where it's at the top of the wrist, and going right the way up to the top of the cuff as well. And then as we go down the side, you'll see I won't go all the way down, and I'll leave a part of it with that first highlight colour, just so it blends through, and you can probably just make out there the initial grey that I first used. But the cuffs and things, because they're sharp edges, they're probably going to get more of a highlight on there just to make them pop a little bit more. And then exactly as we did with the wood, except this time you can see I'm being very deliberate on the areas that I go, just on the edges to pick them out. So this bit might look a bit extreme just because the contrast between the black and the white, but you can see on the hands now, so I'm picking out the knuckles because they're the raised areas that are always going to be most prominent on a miniature, and then a little bit at the top and the bottom of each finger. So here there's again where the knuckles would be, and then across the top to blend that in, And this again, it's a good way of making the skin stand out. And I'm just picking out the key areas. As I say, it looks quite drastic because of the contrast in the colours, but it does work. Same here, so on the curve of the hat, I'm just doing the middle of the curve that's pointing up towards the light source, and leaving the previous 2 layers in there. And same with this collar on the back here. Now if we're going back to those belts, so you can see again with the highlight, we're picking out areas, and I'm deliberately scratching on and leaving it a bit patchy now. This is because when you're using a base colour like a nice brown, it leaves a bit of variation. Same again with the next sort of block of the belt, and even there on the miniature you can see the area that's darkest around the recess, and that's still going to be the original base colour, and that just again gives that nice gradient as you're going up. Now here, this section of the belt's quite nice because it's not in direct light, so I'll pick out like the detail there, the little nook that's cut out on the belt, and the highest areas, and then leave it at that. I don't go all the way down to the bottom of the belt like I did on the upper parts. Right, so this bit is our third highlight, the third and final highlight that I'd normally do for a miniature this scale. So I've again just mixed in the last bit of white, and this is where I go in and pick out very particular areas on the model. So to show some contrast, I'm going to pick out the buttons. Now these would either be done in a colour or metallic depending, but when we get onto the cuffs and things and the folds in the fabric, you'll see how it really makes the miniature punch. And again, that would be the same. So this, if you, for example, if using the red, where you're adding a bit of scarlet to brighten it up, this is where it would just be pure scarlet. I wouldn't have any of the base red in the initial layer. And same again, just going through and picking out any details that I want them to punch a bit more and make them stand out. So starting with the hat, just picking up the very top of it now. So these are from here on in, this is my brightest highlight. So again, you can see the previous brown, the previous grey is still under there, and there's a transition from the 3 or 4 different steps. Same as we go across the face. I'm just going to very touch the tips of his nose and a few tiny areas and nowhere else. So here on the tabard you can see the previous highlighted layer, and I'm just picking out very few areas now and dotting it on. I'm not actually doing massive sort of paint strokes, I'm just picking up the most raised areas just to make it stand out a bit more. Now this should be a good example where you can see the variation. So if this was my highest highlight colour, you can see here on the shoulder I'm just picking out very particular areas. I'm not doing the whole thing. It's again, because of the contrast in the colours here, the black and white, it looks like a really massive difference, but when it's an actual colour that you're using all over, it does blend in a lot more. And you can see here, same again, just picking up the raised areas. I'll pick out a few of the creases, same as on his back. So the main crease, and just going left to right down the middle because that's the highest point and that's where the light would catch the highest. And going up to the belt, you can still see the previous highlight layers as before. Stretch it out a little bit where there's any extra detail on the sculpt. So in this case, those 2 big creases that are obviously following the form of his shell underneath. And that's it. Very simple. Pick out a few little areas, dot it around, and keep the highlight as is. And again, going onto his sleeves and his shoulder on this arm, like I mentioned before, bear in mind the shape of the miniature. You can see them just going up. You can see a lot of the previous 2 highlights on there, picking out a few of the creases, done. Now when it comes to the cuffs, I'll do the rounded edge because that's obviously the most crisp of detail, and the same technique again, going from left to right in, and you've got this nice sort of highlighted area that runs down the split in the middle of the actual cuff. It's also the way you can do non-metallic metals and things like that as well with any cylindrical item. Same again here, just going down, joining up the outline and leaving it that. And the last little bit I just want to highlight to you, so coming down onto the coat, you can see there I'm just picking out areas, tiny little bits. I'm hardly going over anything. Same here, there's you can't quite see it on the video, but there's a fold that goes right up there into his shoulder, and that's the bit I'm concentrating on. That's the highest point. And then a few little flecks just on his arm here, just to pick out some more highlights. and that is him pretty much done. So same sort of thing, I'll go around and pick out a few areas, just a few little lines here and there, just to sort of, again, accentuate that contrast. Otherwise he's done. And here he is done. So we'll do some close-up images in a second. But just as going around, now obviously as I mentioned, because of the contrast, it's a huge chunks of light and as it's jumping. But it should give you a good idea of how you go about placing your highlights. And you're just picking out the raised areas and going further and further up as you go up in your highlight. And it shows here, so as you mix from your base colour, add in your highlight colour in extra steps. And again, as I say, for a model this sort of scale, I'd do about three highlight steps. And you keep going higher and higher, and then you pick out all the points, and you're left with a really nice sort of finish to it, where it shows a bit more detail than would normally be on there, especially on flatter areas, or like his cuffs, things like that. I hope the video's helped, and sometimes it can get a bit tricky figuring out where to put highlights and things. Now I could go another 2, maybe 3 steps of highlight on this if I really wanted to, but for this scale I'm happy with this. As I say, I hope this has helped people. And especially when it comes to understanding where to put highlights. Again, as I always say, I'm not the best painter in the world. This is just little things I've picked up over the years, and the idea of the channel is to help any way I can with anyone who's getting into the hobby or has been into the hobby and wants to improve their painting. Overall, it's pretty good. I would actually recommend, after doing this project, I would actually recommend people to do this on a miniature and keep it on the desk as like a reference, because as he's sitting here now in front of me, it's going to be a good way just to look and go and see how I can push highlights further, because one of the things I've noticed with my painting is I don't go as high as I perhaps should, and it's something I'm trying to rectify and get back and get into. So I'm going to be pushing highlights more in future videos and things. But yeah, if you have any other questions, anything you'd like to know, any techniques and things, please put them in the comments. I'll always answer them, and if it's something like this that I can do a video on to help people, I'll happily do so. But thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.